Hello, I'm Phil Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and welcome to my blog where it's both my mission and simultaneous pleasure to highlight my creative journey in hopes of inspiring you and giving you specific takeaways, all with the intention of your journey being at least a little bit easier. Now, before I fully dive into everything, I would love to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. That way you get all the various lessons and episodes that I put out right when I put them out. Thank you if you just did, and thank you if you already were. It truly does mean a lot to me, as I hope it does to you. So let's dive into things, shall we? Overall, I've really taken the stance of just F it, go for it, meaning being bold, right? So if you've been following along for any number of time in the past year or so, certainly, you'll know that my big pinnacle project that I've been working towards is a 2D animated feature film. And right now, as we continue to go from the development phase into the pre-production phase, I'm really just being like, okay, let's be respectful, of course, but let's reach out to the person we didn't think we could reach out to. Let's find a way to get to them, do it in a way that, as I said, is within the bounds of, respectful and doesn't, blindside them necessarily. And just propose to them what it is that I'm proposing, right? And do it in a way that is engaging, dynamic, and makes them, at the very least, look at it and consider it, right? Now, of course, they are welcome to give a no, things of that nature, and many people do give a no, but even just in the past week alone, I reached out to various people, and while some have not gotten back, others, said it wasn't for them, there were a few that responded with, thanks for sending this, let me review everything and get back to you. So, still a ways away, from solidifying anything of actual substance, but at least just that entry point into the door is wonderful, right? And so it's partly a numbers game, right? Just continuing to reach out to people we want to partner with, that we think would be good for the project and we think that would benefit from this project, right? So it's not just give me a handout. As I said, it's about letting them know of the opportunity there and just connecting the dots for them, making them see this is what it could be. Here's how we benefit. Here's how you benefit. And allowing it to be a business decision, and you keep it as succinct as possible, and put the ball in their court. And in fact, this week, I'm also going to be putting out an episode about how to structure emails, right? Both from phrasing as well as what you want to include, what you want to exclude, and those various factors that can help make your emails more. I'm trying to think of the right word, but be able to be responded to, right? To make people want to actually do it. And, one of the ways that I'm seeing that I know that my emails are effective is, sometimes the people that I reach out to are a little bit outside the box. It might not be in their normal wheelhouse of stuff, but I acknowledge that and I say, here's how I think we could make it work, and here's why I actually think you are someone good for this project and why this project would be good for you, right? And, it's up to them, as I mentioned, to whether or not they see that same thing. But I have gotten responses from people that, it is a little bit outside their wheelhouse, but they're intrigued by the project, and so we're having these conversations, right? So it's all about just opening that door, and, in many ways, yes, it's about being bold, but another way to state it is just letting go of any limiting beliefs, like playing small. Why can't I get to, for example, I'll give you something, right? So I use Adobe products with everything that I use, I've used it to edit my feature films, right? So Adobe Premiere. And by the way, this actually goes back to, when I was 15 and I worked on this documentary for the Connecticut Hospice. We used Adobe Premiere back in its very, very, initial sort of phases of, back when digital editing itself was more of a newer thing, right? So I've been using, Adobe Premiere for a number of years. And of course, After Effects has been big, and I utilize that for graphics. More and more so now, I utilize Adobe Audition. That's what I use to work within podcasting. Photoshop has always been a big thing. I remember learning about it in, gosh, it may even be like middle school, like 7th or 8th grade or something like that, when I was first introduced to Adobe Photoshop, and, to think how far it's grown. Anyway, the point being that I've utilized Adobe, right? So I look at that, and I look at the amount of content, right, for lack of a better word, that I create, both personally with, lessons and episodes such as this, but then also in my larger, day-to-day work life, and then also through my own art, right? So as I made mention, the 2 movies, but then also even with like, let's say my books and stuff like that, there's various ways I utilized Adobe products. So, the idea was, okay, you know what, screw it. Let me reach out to them and say, hey, would you be open to essentially sponsorship, right? And the money would be going towards specifically my animated feature film, and that's the showcase piece of all of this. But, that will take long time and stuff like that. I get that. So, not only do you get that, but you would also get me to do sponsored content as well throughout this whole thing, talk about how, essentially tutorials and things of that nature that I utilize. Now, I say all this and you might be thinking, okay, is this part of like the sponsorship already? And the answer is no, it's not. I'm still actually trying to find the right people to speak with at Adobe. There's a few people that I've kind of like tried to breach the subject with and whatever. Again, just kind of being polite and who I thought were the right people, but also intonating within the email itself that, hey, if you're not the right person, would you mind pointing me to the right people and so forth. And so right now it's still kind of, going through that process of getting to that right decision maker. But regardless, the point being, again, that's just the idea of like, well, why not? Why not figuring out a way to really just go for it and utilize what I'm already doing that can create value for them, and doing it in such a way that, it just becomes a symbiotic relationship where, yes, I get something out of it as well, AKA at least a little bit of funding, not the full funding, but partial funding for my feature film. And in return, they would get, a plethora of, these wonderful videos that wouldn't just be like commercials, but would be genuine, like how I utilize it in my day to day. So it's authentic, right? And that's really, to me, when I look at sponsorships, and this is a bit of a tangent to it all, but it's interesting to me, when I sort of look at how content gets sponsored, in many ways, and not that, like, listen, there's nothing wrong with doing a commercial, but more and more there seems to be like, hey, we'll give you this money and you create whatever, a short film, a feature film, whatever it is, a music video, whatever, and it'll just be to sell the product. And so it's not aligning the two things in an organic way, like, for example, for me, with this proposed Adobe sponsorship, I look at it in terms of, again, that money would be going towards The Arbiters, which is my 2D animated feature film. But I wouldn't be, at the end of the day, one of my boundaries, let's say, would be that I'm not changing what The Arbiters is, and I'm not changing how I do content. I'm going to make the lessons and episodes continually how I would normally do them, but, just make them more beneficial and highlight more about how I use Adobe products. So it doesn't change the overall nature of how I operate. And certainly, again, not as far as The Arbiters is concerned. Like, that script is what it wants to be. It continues to be shaped, but at its core, it's something very specific. And I would never alter that if whether Adobe or any other company would come in and sponsor. Like, we're not doing that, you know? That is a boundary for me. Whereas I see more and more, right? Someone throws a wad of cash at someone, it's like, oh, okay, cool, we'll create this, and it just becomes very inauthentic. And there's something that I saw recently, I won't name what it is, but I was like, just blown away by it and shocked by it. It's just, you know, we're taking sponsored content to a whole new level, and I have to say, like, audiences are way smarter than that, and so it's just wild to me that we go in certain directions thinking that's going to work. I mean, I don't know, not that I've studied the responses to the Super Bowl ads that much, but just seeing it, people were sort of underwhelmed. And number one, I think, you know, the overuse of AI within those commercials was a component of it. Number two, the overuse of celebrity just to sell stuff. And not that using a celebrity in and of itself is a negative thing, but, you know, I remember when there seemed more creativity that went into the Super Bowl commercials than today. Now, it tries to fake creativity with just outrageous things, let's say, both visually or, you know, perhaps something that's said, but it never, I don't know, it doesn't quite stick the landing as much as it used to back in the day. And I think it's for that reason, you know, it's a laziness to overuse AI and celebrities as a means to sell it versus that, you know, putting on your thinking cap and really going for it. Right? So, as I said, I know it's a bit of a tangent, but the idea, ultimately tying it all back in, that why not be bold and reach out to a big company like Adobe and say, hey, there's value here for you, and this is why it makes sense. And as I said, it's a conversation, you know, we'll see what happens, and I'm open to any kinds of opportunities of that way. I'm thinking about the ways that it can be utilized, you know, and, you know, if anyone has an in with Adobe or with another company that might be interested in what I'm already creating and, you know, the arbiters, and feels like there's a symbiosis there, you know, let me know. I'm curious, but to me, it's all on the table. Like, it's time to stop thinking small, start thinking big, and going for it, being bold. Why not you, right? And as a caveat to that, though, you know, for me, it comes with years of experience. Like, this year, I'm coming up on 20 years of, like, legitimately working in the entertainment space. As I alluded to, like, I edited a documentary for the Connecticut Hospice when I was 15, right? And that was a professional gig, and that was something that, you know, aired on ABC and was very well received, and I'm very well proud of as a big milestone project, you know, that got me going. It was really wonderful. And so that is to say that I have the foundation underneath me. I've studied the craft. I know these various things. You know, there's this past week, various friends send me certain things to kind of look at, and, you know, it's interesting to look at that stuff and seeing where they're at in their journeys, right? And I say that not as either begrudgingly or like I'm high and mighty, but I have benefited from people in my life, you know, doing the same for me and being very honest and providing both the criticism and the feedback to elevate my work. And so, you know, I kind of look at where they're at and noticing, like, okay, there's creativity here. It needs work, yes, but if the person's willing to put in that work, there could be something there. And some of it's as simple as better writing, right, for lack of a better term. So getting rid of passive voice, structuring their sentences better, and, you know, shortening things, eliminating unnecessary aspects, yada, yada, right? Like just the formality of writing. And we can overlook that, but it is very important, right? And then secondly, you know, just more bigger things of like, okay, instead of starting here in terms of the story, why don't you start here a little bit later? That way it's much more intriguing, and, we'll figure out the rest of it as we go along. That's how TV pilots work. They don't really start at the beginning of, quote unquote, the story. They start further along and more so in the action, and then we as an audience are hooked. And, so I'm kind of thinking about these things and, passing them on because, again, I've benefited from them and I continue to, right? So my project, The Arbiters, we're still developing this script as we go on. We're about to have a writing, not a retreat, but a long session to go over this latest pass of the script. And we have continually done this for the past almost 2 years. And we have sessions that sometimes last like 4 or 5 hours, and we barely get through 30 pages. And me as the writer, I'm taking all this criticism, if you want to call it that, and it can be quite brutal, and so you have to have thick skin. But I know in my heart of hearts that, they're doing it because they see the potential in the story and they want to elevate it, right? Why else would they take the time to read it and respond and be so detailed with their notes, right? So that is very encouraging in that regard. But it's one of those things that, and I know I've kind of gone on this now branch of it all, but I think it's important, to have a group of people around you that can be honest with you, that can provide you with this feedback and try to elevate your work. Because what you don't want is to complete the work, have it premiere, have it whatever, and it's not as good as it could have been, right? And more so, like, from my own experiences of pitching The Arbiters to, financiers and studios and actors and all this other stuff, in many ways, all those people are looking to say no, right? Like their plate is already so filled, and whatever else, that whatever breaks through the noise has to really resonate. Well, how do you do that? So it starts with that foundation that I talked about, right? When we talk about scripts, first off, like simple things that are often overlooked, but formatting, first and foremost. You'd be surprised how many people have scripts that they submit to studios and they're written in Microsoft Word, and you could in theory do that, but you have to format it in the right way, because there is a format to the script, and if you don't follow that format, then it already indicates like, oh, you don't know what you're doing, throw it out. Number one. Number two, the writing style, right? So even just basic stuff, grammar, spelling mistakes, like all that stuff, like there's no excuse for that stuff anymore, right? You have to do a pass at it, have someone go do a pass at it. I mean, hell, you could literally throw it in ChatGPT and be like, tell me all the spelling and grammar mistakes, right? I know people have viewpoints on AI, but just, I'm saying as a worst case scenario, like this is the world we live in. And so from the perspective of the buyers, for lack of a better term, this is what they're looking at. And they're looking at, there is no excuse for those things. So that's just to like get a shot. And then of course, the story has to be engaging and yada yada, right? So each of these things is a hurdle, and you have to, really put your best foot forward. And that's why I am grateful that I've had so many mentors, at times be a little bit rough, not like physically, but like, where it's the words themselves sting, but ultimately it is stuff that I needed to hear and apply and whatever else. So we all need that in our lives. And, I don't know, it's just also one of those interesting things when people say like, oh, I'm always an honest person and I like honesty in return. And it's like, do you really though? It's just interesting to me to kind of see it in that standpoint. Because even for me, I know deep down that I want the criticism, but yeah, I'm not going to lie and say that it's not brutal to sit in writing sessions and, just be bombarded with those things. But again, I'd rather have that now because that is what allows me to develop a story and have it ultimately resonate globally, worldwide, blah, blah, blah. And not only that, it allows me to get my foot in the door with the gatekeepers that I spoke of, right? So yeah, that's a big part of it. Now, in the phase that I'm at with the project, there's only so much I can do. You could devote hours into outreach, and I did. Like, the Berlin European film market is happening right now, and so I essentially looked at the list of animation, not necessarily companies, but people who were involved in animation that we would want to work with, and I reached out to them and said, hey, we couldn't make it to the Berlin European film market, but we respect what you guys are doing. I think there's an opportunity here, blah, blah, blah. And we're getting some of those responses. So again, it's also seeing where opportunities lie and finding them, right? That's also part of being both bold, but being bold also means being strategic, right? So that's a way that I was strategic, and trying to take advantage of the opportunity as it is there. So, but all that said, that there's now more free time to utilize because I'm not in the day-to-day trenches of writing, day in and day out the script. I'm not day in and day out in terms of whatever, just working on the animation side and whatever else. Like right now, we're in a sort of not wait and see period, because we are being, as I said, active about it, but it's much more, for lack of a better term, send out emails, make calls and things like that. And there's only so many of those you can do within a day. And, you don't want to just do it to any company. You want to do it to the right people. So that's what we're doing. One last thing about the being bold thing, there's film grant that we're applying to. And I say that because, it's with a co-production that we're partnered with, and they're the ones that have to apply instead of me directly. But it's just kind of fun in the sense that, I reached out to them like, hey, I think we should apply to this. And they immediately are like, yes, totally agree. And, some of the things we're not quite have like the T's crossed out and the I's dotted. But I'm like, again, we have enough material and whatever else that we can present a valid case of why we would be deserving of this, and the rest we'll figure it out a little bit later. And, if it comes to fruition, the idea would be that we would utilize that money to film the live action version of the movie. And I say that is because instead of doing traditional storyboards, and I've talked about this in other stuff. And by the way, you can watch the behind the scenes making of how we made our proof of concept for this project. And I talk about this specifically. You can watch it on my Patreon page. And the nice part about Patreon now is that you can essentially become an ongoing patron and pay monthly, or you can just pay for a post that you want to watch. So if you look at the Arbiter's behind the scenes making of, you can, check out that. And it's all a part of it. It's like a 20-minute documentary that documents our process up to this point, which is really cool. Anyway, so the idea is that instead of doing traditional storyboards, we film live action, and then we take that, cut it until we can really get a sense of the movie, and then we hand that off to the animator. So the idea is that if we get just this grant alone, would be nice, where we could take that money, do the live action version. And the fun part would be we'd fly, we would end up filming in a foreign country, which would be fun to, it's a nice additive thing to like say to the actors and entice them like, hey, do you want to come here? Essentially, like, we'll go on vacation, we'll film for, whatever it is, 8 hours out of the day, for 2 weeks or so, and we'll have a movie, and you also get to spend the time at this country, right? Like, that becomes a little bit more enticing. And then we would use the rest to, it wouldn't be to create the full thing, but we could use it towards storyboards and, get that done and, whatever else out of that as well. So that's the idea. But inherently, it's about that boldness, right? Of like, let's just go for it. We'll figure out a little bit of the rest later. And I say that because there's a fine line between the naivete of it, of like, let's just go for it, but also knowing that you have the wherewithal, you have it, as I made mention, I have 20 years of experience, that when that does come, that we built enough of a foundation, both like me as a filmmaker and then us as like the film itself, we have enough stuff there that we can build upon, where it's not just going into this purely blindly. Although that sometimes could work too, right? So just ultimately just shatter limiting beliefs and go for it. All right, so shifting gears, now that I have more time, I'm reopening up dormant projects. And in particular, that means this digital film school sort of parody video that I had made. It's overall edited in terms of, what the piece is. So it's about 6 minutes, but it needs insert clips, right? It needs certain B-roll clips, and it needs music, and then of course color correction and sound design and all that stuff to complete it. And, speaking of the Arbiter's documentary that we had made, the making of, that 20-minute piece that I spoke of, to get it over the line, at the time I was so busy with other stuff that I took on another editor. Normally I edit all the stuff, but at that time it was just so overwhelming that I was like, okay, I know I can drive this home, but let me offload some of the work. And so I met someone through Emerson. Her name is Shannon, and Shannon Josephs, if you'd like to look her up. And we had spoken. We took we took an untraditional route to get to it, just because of the nature of how things were moving and where we were at. And she was amazing at rolling with the punches. This one would be a lot more straightforward, where I would send her the project, consolidated version of the project, and she would have that. First step is finding, those clips, that stock footage that needs to be inserted. Some of it's graphics work, some of it's VFX work, and, just taking it over the finish line. Because I think at this point it's been like almost a year and a half of this just laying dormant, and I want to get it over the finish line, And so now having Shannon as part of my wheelhouse, this allows for that to happen, and I don't, I can sort of macro manage, and, she'll do the day to day. So that's amazing. And then part of the other thing, that's the first thing that I want to get done, because it's just been so long and I just want to get it over the finish line before I start any new project. And the new project that I want to start is kind of this documentary for myself of my 20 years in entertainment, right? And looking back, and so I can showcase to people, but if nothing else, it's just something for me that I can look back and, look at my career thus far and see how far I've come. And so that'll be the second thing that Shannon will be a part of, and I can't wait for that. And what's been fun also is for that, there's a lot to pull from, but I also reached out to various people throughout my life that I have worked with and that have meant a lot to me. And I, asked them, would you mind essentially sending in a minute or less of, how we've interacted, how we met, just anything from the heart about us working professionally. And so thus far, it's been wonderful. I've gotten quite a number of videos, which has been amazing. And then other people are also responding of when's the deadline, when you need it by, and they're making plans to do it. So yeah, I think this is going to be a very rich documentary that I'm truly honored already with how it's progressing and seeing it come together, and will be wonderful. And I think this is the one that Shannon will have a lot of leeway with in terms of infusing her creativity into this. So I'm excited for that. It'll really be wonderful, I think, and I can't wait to share that in due time. So yeah, there's that. And then the other creative thing that I've been really trying to get back into is working on my second novel. It's been a lot of start and stops, and I've been thinking a lot about it. And now I think, I'm at the point where with the Arbiters, I can allow myself to dive more into this. And the idea would be to write, 3,000 to 4,000 words a week, which for any writer, professional, is not that much, right? So I'm not asking too much of myself. And then in time, like ultimately, I think it'll be an actually pretty short and breezy book, probably around 60,000 words. So, not that long to write. Now, of course, that doesn't include the revisions, and we'll see how long the revisions take. Sometimes the revisions take take more years than the book itself. But yeah, I'm excited. I think I have, I've always had an entryway into it, but now it continues to solidify more and more in that way. And by diving more into this, it's also allowed fresh ideas to enter for what I want to continue to add into the Arbiters or incorporate into the Arbiters in terms of the revisions I do there, right? But it's good to have time away from that script, so that way when I do approach it for the writer's room, it'll be with a fresh perspective. So yeah, I've been doing that. And then the final sort of thing is I recorded a therapy session with myself and my therapist. His name is Chuck McCon. And, I utilized about 4 cameras. Some shut off, like it was a 2-hour session, some shut off because they were on batteries at certain moments. But I'm trying to take all that footage regardless and streamline it to like a 10-minute cut down of, both for myself, like, just to promote like his work and what it is and, and all that. So, yeah, I don't know. I like, it's like, why not? It's simple enough. And I know the only hard part about it is it just takes time, right? Like for artists, really, time is the biggest issue if we're all being honest. And so, slowly but surely, I called him the other week and I was like, hey, I haven't forgotten about you. I'm just, slowly going through it, but I haven't forgotten about it and I will get it done. So, thankfully he has patience and, I look forward to sending him the final product. I think this week I'll be able to, get at least a good draft to him, right? Whether or not it's the final thing, we'll see. Also, speaking of which, I talked about this last episode, how I've been going through like a creative exercise with the Arbiters where I've recut the footage that we have into a new version of the teaser just to see what can be done, and is it going to be better or not? And slowly but surely, it's taking shape, and I think I've found, a way into it, and I think it's working well. Now, I just need actors to do the actual voiceover. We have graphics. Jonathan Moulton, who I work with, he created these beautiful graphics. He gave me the After Effects file, so now I can just put it in myself. And then I'll just need sound design, and it's good to go. So I'm excited about that prospect of just essentially having 2 versions of this and whatnot. So, okay. Then I want to just, before I wrap out, just talk about stray observations, right? So, you ever notice that there's a certain irony to people who espouse boundaries and the need to establish your own boundaries within the world and to not be taken advantage of and yada yada. Yet they themselves have the hardest time honoring other people's boundaries. Like, am I the only one noticing that? Does this happen a lot? I don't know. It's just kind of very fascinating to look at in that respect. Again, just a stray observation. We don't need to dive too much more into that. Another sort of question, that I've been really asking myself is, what's in the way of my success? Which is really more of a self-reflective question. And that ties back to the idea of being bold, letting go of limiting beliefs, and just going for it. Go big, stop thinking small. And, that's a part of it, but I continue to think of other things of like, what is in the way of my success? How am I prohibiting myself from achieving everything I want to achieve? And that's been a very powerful question to ask myself. So I encourage you to reflect upon that question as well. And then lastly, in my last session with Chuck, my therapist, he talked about, he read from Adyashanti's The End of Your World, and he spoke about this notion of, there comes a point when the pupil needs to stop asking the mentor for everything of, when should I meditate? How should I breathe? Yada, yada. And they really need to start listening to themselves. And it's a wonderful quote. The quote that I knew, so I had read this book called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior when I was about 15 or 16. And there's a quote in there that I always appreciated that, essentially speaks to the same thing. Everyone tells you what's good for you. They don't want you to find your own answers. They want you to believe theirs. And that's very true, right? And so in order for all of us to master ourselves, we have to ultimately take responsibility for ourselves and become the master at a certain point, truly grow up. And I'm certainly not there, right? I'm not claiming that, but more and more so that is an active thing that I'm pursuing, both as I'm talking about within my own art, but within life itself. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at mentally, so to speak. Anyway, those are the stray observations. That is everything that, I felt worth talking about. And recapping, as always though, you are welcome to comment down below with any questions you have about any of the stuff that I talked about or anything that I didn't talk about, right? If there's stuff that you are dealing with, that have questions about or frustrated by, comment down below or hit me up on social media at Svitek, and I'll try to either respond directly or, maybe it warrants an episode and it can help other people, yada yada, right? I truly want this to be as beneficial as possible in terms of what I put out into the world. And so, the more you engage, the more it helps me know what's resonating and all that stuff and where the pain points might be. Also, if you'll allow me to encourage you, I do also utilize Patreon and Substack for some of the stuff to really dive deeper, right? And take the lessons and episodes that I do and just go deeper, right? How it is each episode I try to do, yes, there's a component of how it applies to you and how you can go about it, but in both my Patreon and Substack, I try to go even deeper beyond that. And, each one serves, different things. So it's not the same thing. It's not like if you subscribe to my Substack, you'll get the same thing as on my Patreon. They're very much different mediums. And, through my Patreon page, for example, I offer coaching, monthly coaching for all of the patrons. And that's a way for us to interact and be more direct in communication with each other. And the Substack is also, examining people, artists and what we can learn from them. So, I utilize them in different ways, but all with the same cohesion ultimately. Anyway, I've yapped your ear off. Thank you so much for tuning in. I truly do appreciate it. I hope to see you next time.